our guests on the Wire session today, discussing the Young Lakota documentary. We're really excited to be having everyone on board, especially the directors and some of the protagonists and heroines featured in the Young Lakota documentary. Before we move forward and start with the session, can I get a plus sign in the chat box to see if everyone can hear me okay? Great. So it seems like everyone can hear and my voice is clear to everyone. So welcome everyone. I can see many familiar names in the participant name box, which means that you don't need a huge introduction into the Young Feminist Wire or the Guests on the Wire session, but just briefly. The Young Feminist Wire is a website that is run and hosted by the Young Feminist Activist Program at AWID. And we've been running for about 3 years now. Through the Young Feminist Wire, we have highlighted news and young feminist activism from around the world, including profiling young feminist groups, as well as some of the activism and the work that they do from around the world. The Guests on the Wire sessions are e-learning sessions or webinar sessions that we have been putting on for the last 2 years to have discussions with young feminists from around the world around issues that young women are struggling with in our current contexts and global climate. So today's Young Guests on the Wire session is going to be discussing a very important issue for young women, which impacts young women from around the world. And we're really excited to be hosting this session and talking about abortion and other sexual and reproductive rights today. So before we start, I'd like to ask the participants to use the chat box to introduce themselves. Just type in your name, country, city, or work, and in 1 or 2 sentences, let us know if you've watched the film and any first impressions you've had. Of course, keep this brief because we will be discussing in detail the different issues of the film, etc. But I just want to get a sense from everyone how they've watched the film. I sent out the link to everyone yesterday and the day before. So let me know if you've watched it, what you felt, any first urgent burning impressions that you have. And as everyone is introducing themselves in the chat box, I would like to ask the moderators to introduce themselves. I am Ghadir. I'll be one of the moderators for the session. I'm the YFA coordinator at AWID, and I have been living in Toronto for the last 10 years, working on youth issues and very active on issues related to Palestine in the city, as well as just young women's issues, going from sexual rights to sexuality, and focusing mostly on occupation and colonization. I'll pass the mic on to Marissa.
Hi everyone, this is Marisa Viana. I'm the manager for the Young Feminist Activism Program at AWID. I'm originally from Brazil, but I'm based in New York at the moment. And I have been with AWID for 2 years, but I have a sort of a broad range of experience working on different issues related to young women. But my background is in public health, specifically sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I have worked both at the international and the local level with young women in implementing and designing programs for women's sexual and reproductive rights and health. So I'm really happy to be here and really looking forward to the discussion. So maybe Natalia or Leila, you guys want to go next?
Sorry. This is Natalia. I'm the Constituency Engagement Manager for AWID. I work mostly with our members, and many times we do activities like this with focus on young feminists and young feminist activism. My background is actually in economic and social rights, as well as working specifically on issues related to Latin America and U.S. policy towards Latin America. And I'm excited to be here and to listen to the speakers and learn more about the film. It's such an inspiring work that they're doing on the reservation, and also to discuss the broader global discussion on indigenous rights. Excuse me. Thank you.
Hi, this is Leila. I'm the Constituent Engagement Associate at AWID, and I've been with AWID for over 7 years. And I'm originally from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but currently I'm based in Berlin.
Great. Thank you all. And now I'd like to hand it over to our guests for this session. If they could introduce themselves, give a little bit of background, and then we can start with the first part of the presentation. So Rose, do you want to go?
Yes, hi, this is Rose, and Marion will be joining me shortly. So I'm going to speak for both of us. We formed a company about 20 years ago, actually, and our last 4 or 5 films have been about reproductive rights and justice, and they always center on young women or men, character-driven films that tell stories about issues around reproductive justice and rights and justice, and through stories and situations they find them in, and they always end up being activists in their coming-of-age process, which is very exciting for us. And I'm very excited to hear what you all thought about the film and how you can use it in your work.
Thank you. I can see Sunny is online as well.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this discussion and sharing your opinions on the film. I am one of the characters in the film, and also a reproductive justice activist as a result of not only this film, but my interest and passion surrounding issues with reproductive justice.
Thank you, Sunny.
Great, thank you. So just to go over the agenda for the day today quickly, the session was divided into 3 parts. The first part will be the panel presentation, where I'll be asking our guests today a few questions to address in their presentations. During this part of the session, if you all can make sure that your mics are on mute, and that is that your talk button does not have the mini blue mic next to it. This means that your mic is on mute. When it does have the blue mic next to it, it means that your mic is not on mute. This just creates a lot of background noise, and it makes it difficult for everyone to hear. Part 2 of the agenda is the Q&A period, where you will have the space to ask our guests any questions about the film, dive deeper into issues that you found compelling, have a discussion about how it relates to your context and anything that you would like to bring up during the time. During this period, feel free to either use the hand button, the hand function that you can find on the top left corner of the participant box. And when one of the moderators, me or any of the other moderators, call on you, you can go ahead and ask your question using the voice function, or you can type in your question in the chat box and we will bring it up to the panelists. The final part of our discussion today is a group discussion where we want to discuss as a group some of the issues that were brought out in the film and how we relate to them within our own context, but also we're focusing in this part around sharing of experiences, either around activism that has occurred over the issues that we're discussing in the film today, or just in general strategies that you have used in your own context and in your own work in working on women's rights issues. So I'm really excited to be having this discussion with you all, and I encourage you to be as participatory as possible and share from your own experiences, but also to bring up some of the more difficult questions that we're going to be tackling in this discussion. For now, we can start with the first part, which is the panel presentation. And the first question that I would like the panelists to respond to is what was the intention behind the making of the film, and especially focusing on the Pine Ridge Reservation area? Rose or Sunny, does either one of you want to start?
This is Rose. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, great. Sorry. Okay. I was saying that Mary and I were looking at another story on the Pine Ridge Reservation when Cecilia Fire Thunder became embroiled in an impeachment, and we heard about, we heard the background of the story. South Dakota had just passed this ban, this outrageous ban, and Cecilia was taking up the fight, and we had been working in reproductive rights and justice before for many years, and so this seemed like a natural for us to just follow the story. We were there, and this was happening, and this is a lot of times what you do as a filmmaker.
Great. Thank you. Go ahead, Sunny.
I just wanted to say my intention behind being filmed was it was an opportunity for me to be heard during a period of when I felt like I wasn't being heard. So I knew that this doing this film, as I call it, modern day storytelling, because in our culture we're storytellers, that I knew it would amplify my voice, but I had no idea how far it will reach, and I'm still experiencing that. Thank you.
Great. Let's move on to the next question. Why were youth or young women a focal point of the film, and was it intentional? And if it was, then how come?
We had done a film before this called The Education of Shelby Knox, which I don't know if anyone here saw, but it was about a young woman, also nascently a feminist, and getting involved in a fight in her hometown. And we saw how successful that was to sort of follow a young person coming of age when we sensed that they would in fact become political, or that they had what we began to understand was the activist gene. And so we wanted very much, since it's women's issues, of course we wanted to find young women who were touched by Cecilia and who were beginning to come of age in a way that they understood at least what she was doing, and see in her a kind of mentor and support system for their own empowerment.
Great, thank you. Sunny, do you want to speak from your perspective what it was like to be a young woman in the film?
Being filmed at such a young age was a very powerful experience for me, especially coming from an Indian reservation where I feel like we as Native American women and as Indigenous women in the United States and as well as Canada are hardly ever taken seriously or heard, or even in conversations within mainstream feminism. So being filmed was a powerful experience. I suppose we were the focal point because our age and of how interested we were around the topic of reproductive justice and our involvement in activism and bringing change on the reservation.
Great, thank you. How is the film relevant to a global audience of young feminist activists across the world?
I hope the film is relevant to everyone who saw it. I think it is. I think that the issues are probably the same at their core. I think their manifestations in different countries and different situations are, of course, different. And I would love to hear, since we have, participants here from all over the world, I would love to hear their situation, how they related to it in the specifics, because I do think that this film can relate. This might be a very rural town in the United States of America, but I think it might be, there are resonances about rural living and rural life all over the world.
And Sunny?
I too also hope that it will be relevant to the other feminists in here as well as globally. I know all of us don't have, we're in rural, a lot of feminists are in rural areas and we are doing on the ground work, but, and we don't have cities like New York City or a lot of opportunities like that. So I hope it's relevant to feminists globally.
Great, thank you. Now I'll just open up the floor to the panelists to add any more remarks, or if you want to say anything more about the film before we dive into the Q&A session.
This is Mary, and I just joined. Sorry I'm late.
Welcome, Marian. We're just diving into the question and answer session, and if people want to raise their hands, they can, I believe, here, and they can speak into the mic to ask their questions or share their observations.
Yes, please feel free to raise your hands, to use the talk function, or to write out your reflections and questions in the chat box. But since we are a small group today, I'd encourage you to use the talk function and so we can have a good discussion and conversation.
I see, Heather, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you said that you definitely felt overwhelmed by how universal the issues felt. Do you want to expand on that and talk about that from your own experience?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
We can hear you. Go ahead. Oh, yay. I work as an abortion provider in Central Texas, and Texas is going through some pretty strenuous restrictions on abortion at the moment. And I also work with the National Dating Abuse Helpline. And so the convergence of those two specific issues, violence against women and reproductive justice in the film, was really personally overwhelming because that's my professional life as it is anyways. And I just wanted to take a second to tell Sunny how inspired I was by her courage and her conviction. And I think that what she said about being an example for other women to be able to get out of an abusive situation, I think it's beautiful and tremendous and so necessary. And I just wanted to thank her for that.
Thank you, Heather. Are there others who would like to contribute from their own perspectives about their experience and how they related to the film as well and how they saw the linkages? I know for me, I'm also identified as being indigenous from Guatemala, and so I really related to it, and I really related to it from the perspective also of being an immigrant woman in this country. And I think that for me really brought home the lack of access to reproductive rights education in our communities. And I think this isn't just indicative of indigenous communities, but I think it's actually something that's very broad. It's a very taboo subject to discuss, especially when you're young. It's not, at least in my own community, it wasn't customary that we would have open discussions about reproductive rights or, you know, about our own coming of age as well. So I really related to it from that perspective. And I also thought that despite the challenges, there were a lot of inroads that the protagonists were able to make in relationship to the discussion around reproductive rights. And specifically, I think, something really important, which is self-determination for indigenous people, and I think for women as well. You know, a lot of the struggle for women's rights is about being able to determine what happens to our own bodies and access to services that allow us to exercise our rights. I see somebody. Deborah, do you want to speak? Please go ahead. Use your mic.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me? All right, fantastic. I guess the question that I had really was mostly for Sunny. I've noticed that in the film that there was mention of a woman being a goddess, and I found in other societies in which I've lived, also in Hinduism, that the religion is interesting because as a goddess you would expect in some way that there would be a sign of respect and greater adherence maybe to offering women the space in which to raise their views. And I noticed that with the gentleman in the film who was the rapper, he was quite protectionist in the way he viewed women, and I wondered if that was something that she often experienced in the community.
And you're talking about the white buffalo calf woman in our creation story, which is very relevant to how we believe women should be treated, but as a result of oppression and colonialism, I mean, our culture was basically, it was kill the Indian and save the man, and that's a part of that. As the rapper Lightfoot is, I think he's just a projection of colonization, and it's not rare to experience that from other Indian men on a reservation. So I am hoping with this film and also doing workshops and learning more about where we're from as indigenous people, especially as Lakota people or Dakota and Nakota, the Sioux Nation, that we can reclaim who we were and you know, relearn who we were and practice those values.
Deborah, you had another question? Please go ahead.
Yeah, it was more just a comment. Thank you so much, Sunny. I was really impressed by your ability to just stand up and honestly the way in which it was portrayed in the film. It's very rare to see someone who's so able to kind of question the status quo, and thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that it wasn't an easy task for me to be filmed, and I still I struggle with talking, and it was a personal challenge being filmed. I enjoyed it as well as was extremely challenged by it, so thank you.
There's a question by Graziella on chat. I'll read it out and then one of the panelists can respond. She says it would be good to elaborate on the moment when the brother-in-law announced that he had accepted a job as a PR with Alex White. I felt this was an important moment as Sunny understood his position, but clearly it was a difficult moment. Monica also agrees that it was a very important moment in the film. Would any of the directors or Sunny have anything to say on this? Why was it important to highlight in the film? What was the objective? And also elaborate on what is it that, or Sunny could elaborate on how she understood his position and why it was so complex.
I can elaborate on why and how I understood Brandon. I understand that he had a family to feed, and that's basically for me what it boiled down to, is he was focusing on surviving and staying alive, which isn't rare in that type of situation, especially on a reservation. It's like you do what you can to survive.
That was also our original intention, and then it became very interesting to us to see what it took on his part to survive and what Sunny and Serena did. And it became, within the film, a bit of a morality tale in terms of, sticking to your principles. At one point, actually, Sunny was offered a job working in tribal headquarters with Brandon and went for a bit and then decided not to do that. So it was interesting to see the contrast, but we were careful to show and wanted very much to show the kind of pressures that Brandon did have on him, even though I think it's fair to say we didn't approve or we weren't crazy about the choices he made. And I don't think he's universal. I think there are other young men who might have stuck more to principle.
I have a question. This is Natalia. I know I'm a moderator, but what has happened since the film to him? Is he still pursuing that path? Does anyone know?
As far as I know, Brandon is no longer involved in tribal politics.
He was extremely disillusioned, I think, by the whole political process, and felt on the wrong side of it and was very humiliated. And I think he just sank into he got into a lot of trouble, and it's kind of unfortunate. Because when we first met him, he was very pro-choice. He was very articulate about his feelings about women's rights. Towards the end of the film, and this is kind of interesting, to the end of filming, he sort of came out as being gay. And, we struggled to figure out whether we wanted to somehow include that in the film, but we decided it would be like starting another film, and it probably wouldn't work. We haven't really been in touch with him very recently.
Are there any other questions from participants? I have one that I've been trying to understand as well from my own perspective and from the context where I come from, where, first of all, to say that I see huge similarities between the context of the reservation, but also with the context of the Palestinian territories as they stand right now. And one of the things that struck me was, just the complexities of trying to talk about women's rights issues within a context of colonization and occupation. And as Sunny has mentioned in the talk today, that storytelling is a big part of this culture of continuing stories and passing on histories, and especially histories and identities that are meant to be erased or that are planned to be erased. And one of the questions that I had was, what was the impact of having a film on the community, or creating a film in the reservation area on the community, and what it means for the community there, but also for the characters that have been followed in the film, as well as the political positioning of the film on the reservation.
Well, we haven't launched in the community yet. The film will be available on public television next month. So right now we are in screening processes as well as in film festivals. But what I hope this film will bring to my community and other Native American communities and Indian reservations, as well as rural areas, is opening up dialogue around reproductive rights, as well as knowing our histories and knowing where we came from and knowing who we are, and changing the scene that a lot of us face within our rural communities against which there are a lot of laws against women's bodies. And I hope one day that women can reclaim their sovereign bodies. I also see Heather has a question. How is the Women's Center serving the community? It was a domestic violence shelter, and unfortunately, it lasted 2 years and was shut down due to mismanagement, which happens a lot. It's devastating because there's still no women's shelter on the reservation.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Sunny. And is there any effort to try to bring it back, or has the process of struggling to get a place in the first place and sort of taken its toll on the community and the activists that had initially fought so hard for it?
Well, the tribe itself, the tribal government there, had started a program called Victim Services, which is located in Pine Ridge. Pine Ridge is about 70 miles away from where I'm located, and I mean, the reservation is about 2 million acres. And from one end to the other will take you maybe about a 3-hour drive. So people call in to the victim services, and they are referred out to other organizations. If a battered woman needed shelter, she would most likely have to find somebody within her family who would help her, which isn't really useful, as he can come and find her. He knows where she's going to be at, but also if she wanted to be unsearchable by the batterer, she would actually have to travel off of the reservation and seek services statewide.
So there's a question on the chat box about how the VAWA's reauthorization in Title IX on safety for Indian women that allows tribes to prosecute non-native violent crime impacted on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Does anybody on the panel have a sense of that? Go ahead, Sunny.
I just kind of want to elaborate a little on some history between tribal nations in the United States with the United States government. It's a special relationship. The federal government and the tribal governments have laws that intersect. So on Indian land, as a result of the Oliphant case, which happened in the 1800s, tribal courts were not allowed to prosecute violent offenders on the reservation if they were non-tribal members. So a lot of non-tribal members, white men, were taking advantage of this law for several years and sexually assaulting Native women on the reservation, knowing that they could get away with it. So that's a little history of that. VAWA's reauthorization is still being concluded and has to be added and adopted within tribal laws. So tribal courts and tribal systems, tribal governments actually have to take up that opportunity to incorporate those laws that were passed within VAWA and add them to their tribal code so that they can prosecute.
Yes, Deborah, go ahead.
Just wondering, is there a suggestion as to how best Indigenous communities can be supported kind of from on a policy level then, based on kind of the legal disparities and such? The incidents of violence and rape and etc. that's gone on over the years, it must be, I personally think it really needs to stop, and I just don't know what would be advised from Indigenous communities themselves in order to be able to better promote that, if you could speak to that.
Are there specific policies that we could be supporting? Are there is there the work of a specific organization maybe that folks could get involved with to support Indigenous reproductive rights that you know of?
There are several Indigenous organizations throughout the United States that work together. One of them is the Native American Women's House and Resource Education Center, which is located in South Dakota, as well as the Indigenous Women's Resource Center, which is nationwide and involves all tribal members. And everyone, a lot of the Indigenous women seem to be in their organizations or coalitions. You also have, I know on the Rosebud Reservation, right next to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, where they have a similar situation and experiences. They have the White Buffalo Calf Women's Society. As far as anything on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, not yet.
Yes, Laura.
Hi, so just following up on my question regarding VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act and its reauthorization this spring. There was just a lot of Indigenous grassroots mobilization organization pushing for Title IX, and I'm just curious if that was an issue that was talked about on Pine Ridge, if sort of similar people were involved, like who were involved in Referendum 6 on the abortion ban, if there just were young people that were involved in pushing for VAWA, and if that sort of was a way to keep the conversation alive about women's rights and girls' rights and reproductive justice.
As far as like large organizations, I didn't experience that when I was on the reservation, but within our homes, it was definitely something that was discussed as well as experienced by a lot of the women in the community. So I don't know of anybody in particular who was working on the ground on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation towards passing that, but I'm not going to undermine anybody and say there was nobody. I'm sure there was somebody. There's always somebody doing something.
Yeah, I think one of the problems, if not problems, it's a sustained effort. So you have some people who've been doing this for a long time, but in a rural community, getting people together in the same room is always difficult. So it's very much of a patchwork. So it's a kind of yes and no answer. Yes, there have been people who've been doing this work for a long time. Do they reach everybody? No. Is it slow going? Yes. Another sort of just interesting thing is not having the internet. It took, for most of the time we were shooting, people had to go down, there was a local outpost of the college where people could get online, but it wasn't even easy to get online. Cell phones didn't work all the time, so just communication was difficult.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with Marian on that. I know I didn't have internet access at home. I actually utilized the college's wireless internet as well as my mom's workplace, and it involved me walking to these places. So you're looking at distances, great distances geographically on this Indian reservation. Like I said, nearly 2 million acres wide from each town, or as we call them, districts within the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. You can have 30 to 80 mile difference. I'm sorry, I don't know what the kilometers are for you, but also not only just not having access to internet, but electricity. There's a lot of basics that people go without on this on the Indian Reservation.
Heather is asking a follow-up question to that. Has the communication on the reservation improved since then as far as internet and cell phone access?
Definitely, communication has improved. I mean, I could see it on Facebook. There's a lot of community members, people from my community, as well as other Indian communities in rural areas, other Indian reservations, where they're utilizing the internet more and more. And as far as cell phone access on a reservation, it's really, really spotty. And you're not always guaranteed to have service. I mean, you can go days without service, and there's only one provider on the reservation.
I don't know about in other countries, but cell phone service is private. And so in rural communities, it's putting in a tower to service, not a whole lot of subscribers. This isn't just on reservations, it's in rural places. It's not a money maker. And without a government, what's the word to it? Without government subsidies or actually sponsoring internet service, it's hard to see how that problem will ever get solved unless, I don't know, they come out with some new super duper cell phone that works really well, or internet. But for the time being, you have one provider and a very dispersed population. So it's actually a somewhat, it's an overlooked, at least in the U.S., real barrier to communication and organizing.
as is the whole issue of transportation. I mean, you know, Sunny, I know you can elaborate on this, but I know in the making of the film how many problems we had just to get people to us, who was able to show up and who wasn't, determined what opportunities were open to them.
Oh yes, definitely. Can't forget about the lack of transportation in that time. I say in that time because since then, transit system has been incorporated onto the reservation, which has been very successful. But during the time of filming, Serena and myself, we didn't have access to a vehicle, so we had to work around that. And also, I'll paint you a little picture for lack of access to transportation for community members. I attended the tribal college on the reservation, and I graduated with my bachelor's degree. But it was like a fight for me to get the classes that I needed because it's so rural and people weren't in the English department. So I was like one of the few who wanted an English degree at my tribal college. And I had class in Pine Ridge. So I live in Kyle, and the distance between Kyle and Pine Ridge is roughly about 70 miles one way. I didn't have a vehicle, and I was borrowing rides and catching rides so I can get to class. And one night, the only ride that I could find was my mom's res bomb, we call them. And it had no shocks. The vehicle had no shocks. It was minus 14 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and her car also had no heat. It was tough, but I did it. That's just a little bit of what we face on the reservation.
That is really interesting to note some of the more physical challenges of having access to making this film, but also, you know, what it meant for the people involved in the film to be there, and it only shows the commitment that there is to have this done. But I'm also curious from a artistic perspective and from a filmmaking perspective, especially if there are any young filmmakers out there in the session today. And this goes, I guess, the question to Rose, and what were the challenges of, for example, getting funding for a film to be made around Indigenous issues, and what was and how, you know, how are these challenges being faced by different filmmakers today, but specifically by you and your interest in exposing the issues on the reservation area?
Yeah, I wish I could say that it, you know, in a funny way, that it was harder because it was an Indigenous subject. No, it's just really, really hard to raise money for films. And we, with our next film, we're going ahead and shooting sort of and raising the money as we go along. It never gets easier. It's just a hard part of making films. I wish I had some, you know, great answer about some pot of gold somewhere. But basically what we raise, we usually try to raise a bit of money to get ourselves going, start shooting, and then raise money as we go along. The editing period is always really, really long. And the piece that's so hard in making films is not so much the shooting or the equipment or any of that, or even transportation. It's that it takes a lot of labor.
And also, what was and particularly difficult, actually, in making this film was the unpredictability factor. You know, going to the community, the instability. I mean, you know, there's a whole thread in this film where there's an emphasis a little bit on the dysfunction. And I think that just mirrors the government and mirrors the fragility of, you know, how this government is set up, and how the relationship of the state and the federal government to a territory that's supposed to be sovereign. And in fact, as it plays out, it really isn't sovereign. It's like a sheriff without a gun. And so we kept seeing this over and over again, and in many ways had to play catch up and staying on top of the story. Brandon's unpredictable turn to work for Alex White Plume, which was a surprise to us, and you know, we understood it could be a cautionary tale, it could implode, we had no idea, but decided we had to follow it because it was a door into the political realm. And there's the state election, obviously that's what and the ban, obviously that's what we were going with Cecilia Fire Thunder, but the unpredictability of the tribal election, we had no idea how that was going to sort of manifest itself, and as you can see, it did, and it unfortunately, Cecilia didn't win. Had she won, the film would have been neater, and perhaps, certainly, for all of us, more satisfying.
Thank you. There are two questions, one from Heather saying, I don't remember hearing anything about the BIA in the film. I know it's a really contentious issue, but how does the BIA affect tribal politics?
The BIA and tribal politics are interconnected, and the tribe follows the laws of BIA, which are federal, and the BIA is highly prevalent within Indian reservations.
Was there another question, Hadir?
Yes, there's another one by Deborah. Deborah, do you want to read out your question, or should I read it out for you?
I mean, it's not so much a question. I guess it was more a comment, but it was just to follow up on something that had been discussed a bit earlier regarding the kind of issues regarding the domestic violence. But I mean, I think we can leave it for those who. Does everyone have access to be able to read it? Or?
Sunny, can you talk to this? Because so certainly in terms of women supporting each other, my experience and my understanding is, you know, Cecilia had a strong supporters in women in Kyle, and you know, the area around. Could you speak to this a bit?
And young people. I mean, I think this is a really astute. It's a really astute question, and I think the reserve as well, also with younger people, is really interesting. You know, the younger, older people dynamic.
Well, I can definitely elaborate on my own personal experience because I had a terrible relationship which was caught on film. The worst of it wasn't caught on film. So with my experience with domestic violence, I didn't feel like I had a strong support system outside of my family. I mean, hardly even within my family. There was a time where I got into a fight with my boyfriend, and the support that I had within my family was I overheard my sisters and my mom talking, and they said that they didn't want anything to do with me if I went back to him. And I didn't want to lose my family over this relationship, so I didn't go back to them.
Wait, they said if you went back to him, that you would lose them? I didn't know this. Tell me this again. Wow.
Yeah, because he was drunk, and I didn't drink alcohol, and he became violent with me, and they knew about it, and I was in my room, and the walls are paper thin in the house, and you can hear everything, and my door was closed, and I overheard them talking about me and my relationship, and if I went back to him, that they didn't want anything to do with me.
Yes, Digna had her hand up. Digna Peter.
How about Heather, since we can't hear Digna? Heather, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to speak to what Sunny said about her family, saying that they would turn their back on her if she went back to her abuser. And I don't think that that's necessarily indicative of specifically indigenous or specifically rural communities. I think that that's, at least what I've seen working nationally with domestic violence in the United States, that that's universal for the United States at the very least. Family members just kind of feel helpless and fed up, and certainly that's not the best approach at all. But I definitely don't think that unfortunately, I don't think that Sunny's situation or her family's feelings are unique.
Yeah, I also wanted to touch on the fact that, I mean, when you're within a relationship with an abusive partner, you don't want to tell the world, you don't want to tell anybody. You're basically ashamed of who you are and what has become of you, especially like coming from where I'm from. And I was a proud woman, and it's happened to me. And it was really hard for me. It's still hard for me right now to think about it and to express what I went through. We're not out there saying, oh, this guy's beating me up. Can you support me? It's not like that. You don't want anyone to know that you're going through this because it's embarrassing.
Yeah, I think it's easy to forget that the things that people have been saying about domestic violence, I wish there was something new to say about the dynamic, but I got to say, what Sunny's articulating, listening to her, certain things just remain constant.
Marisa, I can hear you.
Yeah, I was just trying to see if the mic was working because I couldn't hear anything, and I didn't hear Rose's comment actually.
Rose, would you be able to repeat your comment? I think we lost some of it.
My comment was how, laws become more responsive, police get trained, listening to Sunny, how the experience of being, the experience of domestic violence stays, at least in this country, the same, the kind of isolation, the judgment, how hard it is to break out of that cycle. And I'm curious if this is the same across cultures or whether there are variations, and I'd be really curious to hear from someone in another country about it.
Lara and then Digna, if her mic works, but Lara first.
Yeah, so my comment is actually not directly in response to Rose's just most recent comment. But actually, going back to the point that was raised earlier, that the film hasn't yet been publicly released on the reservation, that's going to be happening in the near future. And I was just curious if you could possibly speak more about that, if you have any plan, like specific outreach activities, if you're going to plan on reaching out to certain like tribal members or council members first, if you anticipate any backlash, if you don't think there'll be any backlash. I'm just curious because it is such a small community, and yeah, just curious how you sort of foresee the film being received in the community.
We're definitely planning outreach with and around the film, particularly with the Native Youth Sexual Health Network, which is an organization that Jessica Danforth founded, and she is a partner organization with this film. She provides a lot of support as well as her organization for the film. I do hope that we can take this film to different communities and, like I've said before, open dialogue around issues that I faced in the film, because I know that my situation isn't rare, and I'm sure there's somebody out there who's going through something similar. And I think it's also important for the younger generations, especially the young women, to learn their rights, and that's what this film helped me accomplish. As for anticipating backlash, I mean, definitely, it's like abortion is an extremely controversial issue even today, but I hope this film can open some eyes.
Digna, do you want to try again with your mic, or are you going to type out your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, but if you can speak a little louder.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Hearing experience of women's violence from other participants, I wanted also to share the women's violence experience here in Tanzania, where we have most of especially women in rural areas, they don't have any choice, they don't have any way they can make about their life, especially around their reproductive health. And the most important thing is, especially in the area where I'm working, women, they get divorced after they get like 6 up to 8 children. And when you get divorced, you're supposed to live with your children, and you don't have any right to take anything from your husband or from the things which you earn together with your husband. So these women, they don't have any choice. They are struggling around to make their own life. Their children are becoming homeless. They don't go to school. They don't have anything. And it's like still the government, not only government, but also the institutions, they are not interested to work in the rural areas. Most of the institutions are working in urban, and the government is still quiet. They are not doing anything. So it's like women they don't have anything to make choice. That's my contribution and my comments to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Digna. It's really interesting to hear about the context from Tanzania. Sunny, was this a response to Digna's comment?
Yes. Thank you for that. You actually reminded me of my own mother's experience, as she had 8 children, and she ended up being a single mother. Fortunately, she was able to have a full-time job, but she wasn't home all the time, and money was very thin at the time when me and Serena were in high school. Serena and I are twins, so we were in the same grade. We actually dropped out of high school in the 11th grade because we didn't have any money to go to school. So I can definitely relate to her in a little bit of those experiences that they have in Tanzania, being in a rural area, and women having, like my mom, like 8 kids. So thank you.
Heather, you had your hand up.
I wanted to ask Sunny about the indigenous spirituality of the Lakota people, and I was wondering if you're aware of any kind of argument or feeling about abortion in the Lakota tribe that predates Christianity or Catholicism within the community?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Do you know of any indigenous spiritual tradition that has anything to say about abortion that would predate Christianity or Catholicism within the tribe?
Personally, I don't have the information. I mean, this knowledge is out there, but it's something that we as young people on Indian reservations, we have to seek out. It's not given to us anymore. I do know of a medicine woman on a reservation who I visited several times, but I've never gotten around to talking to her about abortifacients. But there are plants and herbs that were used medicinally before colonization that were used for birth control as well as aborting a fetus. And I mean, we have our ceremonies, we still have our ceremonies, but it's a slow process of bringing them back.
Okay. I think we need to start wrapping up this part of the session, and I'm eager to move forward with more of the discussion portion where we talk about our own strategies of resistance as well as our contexts. But before we move on, does anyone have any final comments? I know we touched on some very difficult issues, and I don't want to leave them hanging. Any final comments, either the moderators or the presenters or any of the participants have?
This is Natalia. I just wanted to say really thank you to Rose and Miriam and Sunny for joining us and for sharing this story with us. I think that, like they said, it is a universal story that everyone can relate to, and it really is a great tool for educating and also talking about our own activism globally. And just congratulations to Sunny for overcoming so many challenges and being able to get a degree and continue on her activism. We hope we can keep in touch, I would say.
Yes, thank you all very much. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. I have amazed myself. I wasn't know what I was capable of, and I'm still learning my capabilities, and it's quite the experience.
Great. This is a good note to move forward with the session. The next part is, a very interesting part of the session because it's more about reflecting on our own experiences within the context of the film that we have watched and the discussion that we had with the presenters and our guests today. But one of the questions that I really want all of us to think about, this includes the moderators and the presenters and the participants, is how are those struggles of the young women in the reservation linked to the struggles of women that we see every day in our own contexts, in our own lives, and also our own struggles. I just want to have us reflect and make the connections between struggles of women across the board and the issue of abortion or sexual and reproductive rights as something connected to women's experiences in various contexts. So maybe we can spend 5 or 10 minutes reflecting on that question, and then we can move on to the next question. In this part, same thing, if you'd like to share your comments through chat, go ahead. And if you'd like to share your comments through the voice function, please go ahead as well. So Heather is saying in the U.S. 1 in 3 women will have an abortion and 1 in 3 women will face domestic sexual violence in her lifetime, but the rate for violence amongst Native American women is, I think, 4 times higher. And I think there was something in the film about that at the beginning where Sunny was quoting some statistics about the circumstances in the reservation. I can hear lots of typing, so I'm just going to give a few minutes. In the meantime, does anyone want to use the voice function to say something, comment?
Hi, Hadia. This is Marisa. I'll just share a little bit of sort of the context in Brazil, and I think the many of the struggles highlighted in the movie, you know, from accessing information to the question of abortion, sort of to the leadership of women in those spaces and so on. I feel specifically around the topic of abortion, I feel many countries continuously suffering either backlashes or even more restrictions. And even in cases where abortion is legal in Brazil, abortion is legal for three cases: incest, rape, and to save the life of the woman. But even in those cases, it's just such a huge backlash, especially from fundamentalist forces, and these days mainly being extreme evangelicals who are running different policies in the Congress in Brazil, and how that has just restricted more and more, and coming up with things such as the cash transfer for women who have been raped, and if they keep the pregnancy, they'll get a cash transfer to carry the pregnancy to term and to raise the child until it turns 18 years old. So it's all of these sort of new policies being introduced by, that it hasn't become a policy or a legislation yet, but it's a proposal by some congressmen to push this forward. So in a way to restrict abortion is just, and then sort of in terms of how we fight in terms of civil society organizations and activists, it's just really difficult to actually get to the policy level where you're pushing back, because it's just everything's just so cooked up in very at the very high level. So you know, it's just the policies that have been either being introduced or being passed, and how it distance from people's lives, because abortion, the illegal abortion in Brazil, it's a common cause of death among women, especially young women under 24 years old. And it's just amazing how detached the reality these policies are from the reality of women in Brazil, and from my work, I know many other countries as well. So I think the continuous sort of the force, or stronger force of fundamentalist policymakers, and how the policies they've been developing sort of detract from the reality of people's lives is something that it was interesting to see in a movie, but I can also make that connection with many different countries that I have been working in, and also specifically in the case of Brazil.
Thank you, Marisa, for that. That's a very interesting insight into, you know, how the issue of abortion manifests in Brazil. And I think from my own experience, just to put in my 2 cents, is that, you know, in the context of the Middle East, a lot of the countries who have abortion laws in government are actually carrying those abortion laws, or the anti-abortion laws, from the time period during between the First World War and the Second World War during the French and British occupations, where they instilled in these countries a set of law and government that is carried forward from the French and British laws and policies back in the 1930s and 40s. And still these policies are being played out within these countries, such as Lebanon, Egypt, and Palestine, and most certainly in the countries in the Gulf, where abortion is still seen as not the right of a woman to choice. But what I wanted to highlight quickly before we take the next comment is the relevance of the discourse on abortion in Turkey, specifically now, where last year or the year before, the Turkish government had put a stop to all sorts of abortion, including in the cases of danger to the mother or incest and rape, and that has sparked huge outrage from women's rights groups in Turkey. There was a hand up, but I can't. Oh, Layla had her hand up. Layla, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. I just wanted to add something from the perspective of partners regarding management. And there, the problem is not the law and policies, which also, after 10 weeks of pregnancy, allow for abortion if the women's life or health is at risk, and also in cases of rape or other sexual crimes. The problem there is the public perception of the violence against women, so also in the case of rape, and the perspective that the woman is the one who should be ashamed that she got raped in the first place. So that also prevents her to speak out even if she wants to have an abortion, or speak out against the crime. So it's more the tradition and the culture and the patriarchal structure of the society that is the issue, not the laws and the policies.
So it seems like it was really difficult to hear you, Layla, because there was so much echo. But has anyone heard her, can summarize, or Layla, you can just type in the chat box the summary of what you were trying to say. Digna also shared something from the context in Tanzania where sexual violence is a part of women's lives due to poor knowledge, and as due to poor knowledge, sexual violence have been accepted and is seen as women's part of life. That is, yeah, I totally relate, and I'm sure other people can. There's another hand up. Sunny, go ahead.
I just wanted to touch a little on the access to abortion on Indian reservations, or rather the lack of access. Native Americans rely on the federal government through IHS, which is the Indian Health Services, to provide health care, and the Indian Health Services do not offer abortions. The constant reintroduction of policies against women's rights to choose, particularly in South Dakota that I know of, it's every session there's a new bill, law being introduced and people are voting on. It feels like it's constant, and it's very frustrating.
Dear, did you want to add something? I think we lost sound, or maybe I lost sound.
Sorry, yes, I was on mute. Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are agreeing with what Sunny is saying, and that there is a lot of blame on women for violence. All right, so it seems like we are all agreeing on different issues here, but specifically that violence is often seen as a women's fault, and that this is a particular challenge in doing work around abortion, that access to abortion in terms of policies and laws is becoming more and more restricted, especially for women of more vulnerable positions, such as rural women, as we talked about, but also indigenous women and indigenous communities. We've had some experiences shared from different contexts, such as Mexico, Brazil, the Middle East, Tanzania. And Monica just wrote her final comment saying that there are states within Mexico where even constitutional state laws have been really tough with indigenous women. They've been put in jail, not even for practicing abortion, but having a miscarriage. So as we can see, it's there is definitely a war on a women's rights to choose, and war on women's bodies and agencies over their bodies, which isn't a new issue really, but it's interesting to note the similarities across contexts on the difficulties that women face in taking agencies over their own bodies, whether on a policy level, but even on practical levels and more community levels. Amy is asking, how do we influence political will to raise the issues of women's rights to be heard and improved? And I think that's a good question to take us to our next question of discussion, which touches more on strategies, right? And we've seen in the film that there is a lot of strategies that the young women are using to lobby support for their issues and also to raise awareness. Some of it is like direct action, where they're knocking on doors and giving out resources and pamphlets and information. But there is also, you know, the bigger strategy of Cecilia running for office and making her issues heard, but also involving young women. And one of the things that struck me about the film at the beginning is when Cecilia is saying, you know, this is a young woman's issue. We're talking about your bodies, and therefore your voices are important to be heard. So, and I can see on the chat that some people are talking about electing more women and having more women represented in office and in political spaces. And of course, you know, women's political participation has been a big issue on the agenda of women's rights movements across the world. So I want us to dive in deeper and talk about what are those strategies that you've used in your context, from your experience, that have worked, that are similar to the strategies that we saw in the film, or strategies that you've experienced or witnessed that have worked, and you feel like have helped overcome some of the challenges that we've talked about in the first question. So yes, let's dive into that a little bit more and dive into and focus more on what are these strategies that we can be using. And feel free to point out some of the strategies in the film as well. And Sunny, maybe you want to talk some more about the context, especially since you've been a big advocate for these issues. Like, what are some of the things that provided you with something positive at the end?
Speaking from being from a rural area, media plays a giant role in how we perceive ourselves as well as how we perceive the world. I am aware that there's the Women's Media Center. So I feel like basically like we just have to demand our space within media, and also the door-to-door canvassing was I believe was very effective, because there were a lot of people who I talked to who had no idea what laws they were trying to pass, and I think I influenced a lot of people to vote against the abortion ban.
Thank you, Sunny. It's interesting that we talked about media and door-to-door canvassing, because media is often seen as opposing to women's rights issues, or the way they represent women is often not very empowering. So, to say that we demand a role in the media is definitely a way of taking up the spaces that we need to take up. Are there any other reflections on strategies or ways that we can influence the discourse in our communities as well as on the policy level? So I'm just going to read out some of the comments here, but also feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak up. Monica's saying, I think the civil society has an important influence and responsibility together with international resources organizations. It is crucial to bring such noise and attention to these isolated issues, so the international organization and international eyes also bring media attention as well. Digna says that participants from UK, Canada, US, can you share with me more about women violence in your countries? I don't understand how it happens, as you have choices. You can access abortion services, you have income, you're literate, the media is everywhere. Does anyone want to take up that comment from Digna or want to respond to it? Yes, Deborah.
I think Sunny had really brought that up in her point about the lack of women policymakers. I think that's still hugely an issue, at least in terms of what I've seen in London recently. There's also, there's the stereotyping that goes along with a lot of the violence. If you do have the income and you do have the resources, sometimes there's bits of population are even more concerned to bring it up because it might have a negative impact on their families, or there's a reluctance also to then relive the traumas, I think, for a lot of people, because if you do bring it to court, for instance, a lot of people are really scared as to how that will impact them emotionally. I don't know if that answers some of the questions, but I would agree with Sunny that there is a need for more women to be involved in making the policies that do limit the impact of due diligence mechanisms. So sorry, I'm using funny terminology. But to ensure that the violence is actually stopped, where there are mechanisms in place, enforcement and implementation of the policies that are there, and also having more women involved in designing the policies themselves.
Thank you, Deborah. Yes, it seems like it's a very important issue to be involved in making the policies. Lara?
Yeah, I just thought I'd add a few thoughts from the Canadian perspective as someone who's born and raised in Toronto. I think that having choice is very context specific. Canada is a country of immigrants and First Nations peoples, and there are a lot of immigrants who come to Canada who might not necessarily speak English, understand how to access the services that are available to them in Canada, and they might need assistance and then rely on people who might end up not acting in their best interests. So I think there's that to consider, just the specific and contextual difficulties for immigrant women and girls in Canada, and then also men and boys, and also specific to Indigenous peoples in Canada, in terms of the assumption that everyone in Canada is literate, everyone has, some income, sustainable income. I think that's a sweeping generalization. There are peoples in Canada who live in in really, really dire conditions. They're impoverished. They can't access education. They can't, education, let alone sexual education. you know, they don't have access to internet, they don't have access to cell phones. And so while that's not the norm, like there are definitely people who live in these conditions in Canada, and then also I would wager in the United States as well, and perhaps also in the UK, although I don't know much about that situation in the United Kingdom. So I do think that it's aware just to be aware of those differences that exist in sort of what people consider to be like developed, very prospering countries, and how there are still people who don't have any access to services that we assume they might have.
Thank you, Laura. Digna, does that give you more of an understanding of the context in Canada and US and the UK? It seems like Caitlin is also saying something similar in that in Canada there are many people immigrate and have cultural barriers within the Canadian realm. And no reservations. There are many things normalized, especially while rural. We must abolish this idea that Cecilia is an extremist and clarify the idea of rights to our bodies to healthy lives. I really enjoyed when Cecilia said that young women must be those that speak up. And Marissa is saying that access to many things, despite if you're in developing, or underdeveloped country, it really varies. Even in the US, if you look at who can access health services, varies greatly because it is cost prohibitive. Many people seem to be agreeing with that. There's also a discussion going on about how women can be also enemies of women, and that that of course is provides additional challenges to women mobilizing around women's rights issues. And also the importance of young women speaking up. So there are a few strategies here that I just want to summarize that we've talked about, but please continue to write them out either in chat or raise your hand to talk through your mic. But some of the things we talked about was involving women in policy, but we also talked about the challenges around that, in that some women are involved in political spaces but don't necessarily represent women's rights issues. There's also the strategy of infiltrating the media and taking up our own spaces there and making our own voices heard. Raising awareness through sexual education, which right now doesn't actually, a lot of people are growing up in a context where that is not allowed or prohibited or not even provided. And then there's the global phenomena of finding similarities in struggles of women across contexts, which is quite important. And I'm seeing here that there is also a discussion around the involvement of men and getting them on board to being involved in women's rights issues and discourse. So Monica is saying that, in my opinion, developed world countries also struggle with this issue, and I think it all has to do with the lack of education, as Heather and Sunny are saying. And also it's a cultural thing. The patriarchy seeds are very difficult to see sometimes, to be aware of certain dynamics that women think are normal, even though with the media involved. So it seems like there's only Amy who's typing something into the chat, whereas the comments are starting to dwindle down. And Amy's saying that abortion is still a political issue in the U.S. So maybe, I mean, and we have talked about this patriarchy being a global phenomena and women's rights issues, you know, crossing across contexts. So let's move on to the final question that I want us all to discuss here and expand more on that idea of what it is that global and international women's movements connections are and how can they support local struggles. But more than that, I want us to also think about what are the limitations for international global women's movements to support struggles locally? And what is the role of women's movements locally, but also what is the role of international and global links in supporting some of these struggles? And I think someone had already mentioned something about, some of the education that can go across borders to help support the issues of abortion in different contexts. But can anyone speak some more to maybe experiences that you've had where global solidarity has been effective, and maybe some of the limitations of what that solidarity has been? Anyone? Is this a more difficult question? Or are you all just thinking?
There are actions, but participating in this, I'm also really just struck by the value of a conversation like this and how extraordinary it is that we can be all sitting in all these different parts of the globe and having a sharing circle. So I know there's specifics, but I think there may be laws, there may be policies, there may be all those sorts of things, but that this kind of experience is pretty great and very incredibly useful.
Lara, go ahead.
Hi, sure. I would just give one example. This is more on the law and policy side of things, but in British Columbia and Canada, there's a group called the BC CEDAW group. CEDAW, of course, standing for the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is a UN law. And basically this group is based of different nonprofit social justice organizations that are all working on women's or girls' issues in some capacity in British Columbia, mostly in Vancouver. The group convenes in Vancouver. And they've sort of come together, they've used CEDAW, and they sort of use that as a platform to engage with international law and send shadow reports when Canada is being reviewed by the United Nations. They also come together to discuss local issues. For example, there was a Missing Women's Commission of Inquiry that just concluded last year in December of 2012 in the province of British Columbia, which was looking into violence against women in the downtown east side of Vancouver. And this was violence primarily targeting marginalized women, sex workers, and Indigenous women, and looking at the lack of police response to that violence in the past years. And so they sort of used CEDAW as a way to come together and to create like a platform of discussion to coordinate their advocacy action, not only locally in British Columbia, but also in terms of at the federal level when they send documents and whatnot to the feds, and then also in their interactions with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The representatives from the PC CEDAW group that have gone before the IACHR hearings, and also with the CEDAW committee, for example, CEDAW representatives came to Canada recently to investigate Indigenous issues, specifically missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada just last month in September. So I'll just say that I do think that bringing groups together locally that make use of regional international law can be really advantageous and can lead to sort of coalition building, but also educational awareness as local actors become more aware of the different regional and international human rights tools that they can use to advance their own social justice causes that others might not be aware of.
Thank you, Laura. Actually, you touched on a very important tool that has been used across the globe to lobby governments and change policies around access to not only abortion but women's rights issues in general. I know that in the Middle East, CEDAW has been used as a very important tool in lobbying governments to make advances in women's rights policies or policies affecting women's rights issues. Despite many countries in the Middle East ratifying the CEDAW Convention, there are still reservations that lie on the convention that practically make it not even a useful policy to adopt in governments, but women's rights groups have been lobbying over and over to understand and push governments to really articulate what these reservations are. And in terms of abortion, it's definitely one of the issues that have been mobilized more on using the CEDAW. And I guess international conventions, I mean, apart from the CEDAW, but also international meetings and conferences where women in the Middle East, or women's rights activists in the Middle East, were able to make connections and networks of solidarity with global women's rights issues, networks and groups, has really helped in supporting their work. So far we've talked about that, and we've also talked about what Rose was saying in circles of discussions, which is something that the YFA program and the Young Feminist Wire really tries to capitalize on, in having discussions, global discussions around issues affecting women's rights. So those are some of the global strategies, but are there any others that people have witnessed or experimented with that has worked? I see that Deborah is typing into the chat. Oh, Garciela just sent in a comment. She's saying that I used to work for the UN. We could advocate for ratifications of conventions, adoption of laws, and state programs, and we would support governments with international programs. However, the implementation gap is huge, and unless countries put in place real strategies that are supported by their internal budget, all actions are limited in space and time. Gender-responsive budgeting is still used in very few places and limited to few ministries. That is very important and touches on what we have talked about. Deborah sent in a link, reservations to CEDAW for your information. There's also the Cairo Declaration with regard to the Middle East. Yes, definitely very important. And Laura continues in saying, in the U.S., while CEDAW is not ratified, there are mobilizations in support of ratification that are coordinated by the CEDAW Education Project of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, aka CEDAW Task Force, with some links. This is excellent. We're all pulling from different sources and information and talking about global solidarity strategies. Does anyone have any additions to make? Maybe other forms of strategies other than policies and UN solidarity strategies that you've witnessed in the past? I know, for example, from my context, speaking to the Middle East again, that cultural and artistic strategies have become really popular in drawing links between violence against women as a global phenomena. And I know that in Canada, you know, working as someone who came to Canada as an immigrant and working within immigrant Muslim communities, that this idea of, you know, having an understanding of violence against women within the context of the North and within the context of back home or the Middle East, understanding that nuanced discourse was really important in making solidarity between groups working in the Middle East and groups working in Muslim contexts in Canada stronger and solidifying those links. Caitlin's saying cultural reclamation. Can you speak a little bit more about that? And Lara says truth-sharing circles. Do you want to elaborate on what truth-sharing circles are, Lara?
Sure. Yeah, no, I just sort of put that out there as an example of a way to bring those that are most affected by sort of unequal access to services or violence, domestic violence, whatever particular case may be, to come together and to share, just creating an open and safe space. While that can seem so incredibly basic, can be incredibly powerful for those who might be most intimately suffering. So, and also, I mean, another example from Canada is that there's the Truth, this is a bit different, but the Truth and Reconciliation Commission related to the residential school history. And commissions of inquiry take an incredible amount of money and resources, but on smaller scale in local communities, having just sort of like, you know, maybe sort of de facto like truth commission that might be too formal, but just a way in which there could be things set up in the community where people can come together and share their stories and be heard. And just the feeling that your story is being heard and being taken note of can be incredibly powerful and important to healing.
Thank you. Definitely. And Caitlin expands on that, saying, you know, she believes in the arts, media, films, galleries can have an impact for awareness and understanding. And I guess the film that we're discussing today definitely helped. Despite it being specific to the U.S. context, we all seem to relate to it from coming from different contexts.
I just wanted to ask one last question, if I could, of everyone. One big part of the film was the talk about the Christian missionizing, the colonization, of course, and the impact of religion and missionizing on the people, and you know, turning them obviously against women's rights when, you know, as Cecilia said, the strain of matriarchy and the strain of respecting women, which then got echoed in the end of the film with the myth, you know, shows and underscores. And I wonder if anyone wanted to somehow talk to that in their context.
Thank you, Rose. Does anyone want to respond to that, especially those who aren't coming from the U.S. context?
Oh, this is Natalia. I just want to say, at least in Guatemala, where 80% of the population is Mayan and indigenous, the church has played a really strong role in the retrogression of women's rights, and specifically in really influenced the creation stories and the positioning of women in indigenous communities in retrogression of their rights. And I think that there can be, there's just a strong correlation in many indigenous communities around the world with regards to the effects of the church on women's rights, and specifically on the way that women's histories, indigenous women's history is told. And a lot of, I think, even what Sunny was talking about, which was a lot of loss of indigenous knowledge about women's status in those communities because of the effects of the church.
Thank you, Natalia. I also wanted to say that the effects of not necessarily missionaries, but I guess occupational forces during the French and British mandates in the Middle East especially are still seen today in the policies that are provided, despite the fact that now the Western gaze onto the Middle East is that of you know, they're the backward Muslim people who have these backward policies without realizing that actually a lot of the state policies that are present today and impact women today are policies that were set up during the French and British mandate and during those occupational periods, and we're still struggling to change those, especially around abortion and around issues of homosexuality. A lot of these policies were in fact brought in by the British and British mandate. So in that sense, there is similarities in that context. Does anyone else want to expand on that point? Lara?
Yeah, at the risk of talking too much, I guess I'll just chime in once more in the Canadian context, that there's absolutely a history alive in Canada of colonization in the form, most notably, what everyone's most aware of is residential school system, and the Catholic Church was a huge part of that, the residential school system in Canada, as well as the RCMP, the National Police, and then of course the government. And I'll just also through the various laws in Canada, there's a law that's been around called the Indian Act, making Indigenous peoples wards of the state, and that law has been sort of a huge part of continuing, just basically continuing colonization in Canada. There's some Indigenous academics who write really well on this issue, and are also just avid activists. For example, Jeff Corntassel, he sort of has a hashtag ongoing colonization on Twitter, and if you just search ongoing colonization, you can see a lot of the stuff that he posts, just showing how even though we talk about the decolonization process and how that is so important, I think it's also just as important to be aware of that while there are people engaged actively in the decolonization process, there's also colonization that continues to happen. One manifestation of which in Western Canada, particularly for Indigenous peoples, is oil and gas and natural resource extraction, and the tensions between Aboriginal and treaty rights in Canada and Indigenous wants and needs of their land versus economic development and the government's intent to make a profit. So I actually think that there is a history. It was historically related to the church, and now it's related to money.
Thank you, Lara, for touching on that. That's actually a very important point to the context in Canada. And finally, to wrap up, I just wanted to read out Caitlin's final point. She says that she agrees with what was being said. I know that in my studies, my teachers were elders are very commonly saying that it was during colonization that strong patriarchal values came about. So in many ways, going back to matriarchal type values or cultural indigenization can be beneficial. So this was a really rich discussion, and we are coming closer to the end of the session. So I wanted to highlight a few things before we all part ways. And that is that we have evaluations for the session. It would be really helpful for us if you could fill them out. The link is displayed right now on the PowerPoint presentation. Also, since we are speaking about Indigenous issues, Lara has actually been really amazing in writing us this amazing blog. It was the guest blog for the week that we had published on The Wire. And that touches on some of the solidarity movements as well as the Indigenous movements that have been working in Canada to hold the state accountable to violence against Indigenous women in Canada. It's an excellent piece, and I urge all of you to read it and spread it around. But also, if you're ever interested in writing on an issue for the Young Feminist Wire, please get in touch with me, and we can coordinate on that. We also sometimes ask for volunteers for blogs in reflecting on the session that we had today as a way to report back to our other members on The Wire and also let them know of some of the things that have been going on. So if you are interested in writing a blog reporting on this session, get in contact with me and we can coordinate that as well. And yeah, that's it. I'd like to thank everyone for all of their contributions. This was a really interesting discussion. Thank you all for coming in with very personal experiences and sharing and talking about very deep and difficult issues. And yeah, this has been great. I'll pass on the mic to any of the presenters or the moderators who'd like to make any closing comments. And thank you.
Sorry, I was talking with the mic off. This is Natalia. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. I think we had a really amazing and very fruitful discussion. And if anyone missed some great quotes and wants to check us out on Twitter and Facebook as well and follow us, and encourage others to become AWID members so that they can join us for this type of discussions as well. And I believe that Leila has one more announcement to make. Is that correct, Leila?
Yeah, that's correct. So I also want to join my colleagues in thanking everyone for being with us today, especially also the panelists and the moderators. And yes, you can see the evaluation link, which we please ask you to fill out. It's very helpful for us in organizing future webinars. And one more thing, we have made a raffle draw for receiving a copy of this very important documentary. And we've randomly chosen a participant. And we're happy to say that this is Digna. So congratulations, Digna. Yes, and thank you everyone again. And that's it for me.
Rose or Sunny, I don't know if you had any closing words. I think we're wrapping up, and I'm not sure if you had anything else that you wanted to add before we close off. Just a big thank you to you for joining us.
And thank you all. This was, as I said in the chat room, just extremely instructive, wonderful to hear from you all. And, you know, the conversation went in tributaries off the film in so many directions, and that was what was just so great and keeps us wanting to do this work. So thank you. And if anyone is interested in, you know, holding screenings in their areas, please do contact us on our through our website, and we'd be happy to work with you.
I just want to say thank you everybody for sharing your insights and stories, as well as allowing me to participate in this discussion.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Sunny, and thank you so much, Marian and Rose. And we look forward to maybe working with you on some other things. And I encourage everybody who's here on this chat, if you do want to get in touch with the producers, they've been really great to work with, and I think that it's important to get this film out there and to have these types of discussions in different places. So I do hope that you are in touch with them if you want to follow up with setting up something in your own community.